Welcome, everyone. It is such a delight to see you all here. We have a number of elected officials that registered, as well as 28 different Conservation Commission members. And we are just so happy to see you. This event is sponsored by the Westchester Alliance for Sustainable Solutions. Courtney Williams is the founder of this organization, and Vanessa Agudelo is our organizer. My name is Caitlin Chang, and I'm a resident of Hastings-on-Hudson, and I'm a member of WASS, or Westchester Alliance for Sustainable Solutions. WASS is a county-wide effort to move our communities towards zero waste and make Westchester's incinerator obsolete. Our program tonight, Moving Westchester Towards Zero Waste, features national experts on the topic. We will explore the untapped potential of material recovery enterprises, composting, and optimizing recycling. We seek to dismantle the fallacy that everything we throw away is waste, rather than a resource with value. Finally, our greatest hope is to convey that systemic change is required. Individual behavior change is an inadequate solution to the scale of Westchester's waste problem. The structure of the program is as follows. I'll present a brief overview of the current approach to discards management in Westchester. The panelists will each present, followed by a question and answer period. Questions can be put in the chat. Our moderators will select questions from the chat. Finally, we'll provide action steps that can be taken tonight to forge the path towards zero waste. And now I will hand it over to Tracy Frisch, who will introduce herself and the other panelists. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you, Caitlin. I'm delighted to introduce tonight's distinguished panelists in order of appearance. Our first two speakers are each nationally known and highly respected pioneers in the zero waste movement. Neil Seldman, PhD, has been a zero waste and anti-incineration campaigner for the past 45 years. After a long, impactful career at the Institute for Local Self-Reliance, he now directs the Recycling Cornucopia Project for Zero Waste USA. Mary Lou Van Deventer is an environmental journalist who since 1983 has worked with Urban Ore, the for-profit salvaging and reuse operation in Berkeley, California. She is currently the special projects manager at Urban Ore. Dan Knapp, PhD, a former sociology professor, co-founded Urban Ore in 1980. He was listed in the who's who in science and engineering for developing the 12 master market categories of discarded resources. I am Tracy Frisch. I have been an environmental advocate and community organizer for more than 25 years. I'm the coordinator of Zero Waste Warren County, New York, and am a founding board member of the Adirondack Compost Education Council. Bob Spencer is president of the Composting Association of Vermont and executive director of the Windham Solid Waste Management District, which is Brattleboro, Vermont, which operates a profitable municipal food waste composting facility, the second largest in the state of Vermont. With that, I'll turn it back. I guess we'll turn it to Dan or Mary Lou, excuse me. Oh, excuse me. I'm going to turn it to Caitlin. Sorry.
Me. Hello again, all. So I am charged with providing an overview of Westchester County's discard management system. And you might know or be more familiar with the term waste management, but we're going to use discard tonight very intentionally with the belief that the words we use impact the way we think, and that the way we think about waste needs to change. After all, it's not waste till it is wasted. And right here, the image we have is the tipping room floor at the incinerator in Peekskill. This is one of the facilities in Westchester County that handles our discards. How How much of Westchester's discards does the incinerator handle? A lot, 90%. So if you are on this call and you are a Westchester resident, when you bring your discards to the curb, they end up at the incinerator. How much is incinerated per day? 2,250 tons. Per year, 2021, it was 630,000 tons of discards. 390,000 tons of those discards were from Westchester residents. The incinerator runs 24 hours a day, 365 days a week. Another facility here in Westchester County that handles discards is the Materials Recovery Facility, which is located in Yonkers, New York. It is also referred to as the MRF. Most of the county's recyclables are brought here to be processed. Westchester, or the majority of Westchester County, is a dual stream system, which is a positive thing. They accept glass, metal, plastics, numbers 1 through 7, and paper and cardboard. And the recycling rate here in Westchester is 50%. But I'd like to add that a better indicator of how we're doing in terms of waste is really that number that I mentioned earlier, the 390,000 tons that are incinerated. And if you look at that figure from year to year, it really is a better indication of whether we are moving in the direction we want to be. Westchester County also has 2 smaller facilities that take care of discards. One is the Household Hazardous Materials Recovery Facility, the HMRF. And this is a list of the type of items that if you get an appointment, you can bring there. Many of the items are disposed of. On this list, I would say textiles, for example, are reused and recycled there. Compost Ed is a relatively new structure. It's a small scale food scrap composting demonstration and education site. So this was envisioned to be used for students, but also for municipal leaders as a model for what potentially they could create in their own communities on a small piece of land. Yeah. And then a little bit more about food scraps and yard trimmings here in Westchester County. Fall 2020, the Residential Food Scrap Transportation and Disposal Program, RFSTAD, was established. And this was to assist municipalities in starting and maintaining food scrap recycling programs. Food scraps, for the most part in Westchester County, are brought to drop-off centers. A few municipalities do have curbside pickup. And then from there, where do they go? Unfortunately, they're hauled 90 miles to Ulster County Resource Recovery Agency. Why? Because we don't have a facility that can handle the volume of food scraps here in Westchester County. A little more about yard trimmings. Here in Westchester, they called it the Organic Yard Waste Transfer Station Program. That's been running since the late 90s. 24 different municipalities host yards that accept trimmings. And we do have some curbside pickup in Westchester. This final slide on the right, the pie chart is from the EPA, and it is the national composition of discards or solid waste. So you could take a look at that for a moment and just kind of get a sense. And then we can kind of turn to the question, what is the composition of discards that are incinerated in Westchester County? 20% is paper, 4% is glass, 13% is metal, and 21% is food. So with a little bit of quick math, you could see that over 50% of our discards are being wasted, really. They are not waste. They could be recycled. This is heartbreaking, but rather than end on that note, I'd like to take it another way and say that there is so much room for improvement. So we'll end on this hopeful note and this quote: "Hope is like a road in the country. There was never a road, but when many people walk on it, the road comes into existence." Lin Yu Tang. And from there, I'm going to hand it over to Neil Seldman. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Caitlin, for that introduction to Westchester. My name is Neil Seldman. I've been introduced. I've lived in Washington for many years, but I'm originally from New York City, as you probably can tell from my accent. I have been busy the last few months working in Baltimore, Philadelphia, DC, Montgomery County, Detroit, Minneapolis, all of which in which citizens, organized citizens and small businesses are working against existing incinerators or trying to stop proposed incinerators. And the reason is obvious. Incinerations are extremely costly and they are extremely polluting. The resistance of citizens in the last 30 or 40 years has been quite remarkable. There has only one new garbage incinerator built since 1995. And Mike Ewall, who's on this program, can check me, but I would imagine since the 1980s, there are at least 500 proposed incinerators that have been sidetracked, defeated by citizen action. I also want to emphasize small business as well, because small businesses have played a major role in fighting these incinerators, including the real estate industry, which is not necessarily small, but the real estate industry in many cities fears increased taxes, and incinerators require increased taxes. To give you an example of some of the numbers involved in trying to evaluate the cost of incinerators versus recycling and landfill. This data comes from Montgomery County. I am the lead researcher for the county executive, Mark Elrich, who was elected and re-elected on a platform of shutting down the incinerator in Montgomery County that has been operating since the mid-1990s. We tried to get a cost figure from that cost per ton figure. We did our best. We estimated it was about $73 a ton. I think that's low, but that's what we accepted as an official amount. We called the industry and found out that there were truckers and rail haul operations that would take that material to a landfill, an adequate and safe landfill for $55 a ton. That's a $18 difference. Times that by 800,000, it equals $14.4 million per year of overpaying for solid waste services. An investment of about $20 million is needed to make the necessary infrastructure. Also, these costs do not include very important related costs, the costs of the health as a result of these plants operating. Again, Mike Ewall can clarify this, but as I understand it, a measurement in Baltimore in which both Mike and I work trying to end the incinerator there, because the incinerator particulates only impact health, there was an estimate done that the number of people whose lives are shortened because of this one particular pollutant, that cost about $54 million annually in health costs and other related costs. This is why incinerators are feared. People who live closer to them are in more danger than people living further away, although the emissions will go as much as 400, 500 miles around. As the saying goes, the wind makes neighbors of everybody. The other reason to close the incinerator is that it is the biggest impediment to getting to zero waste. And zero waste is 90% diversion from the current waste stream without incineration. And the way to do that is to optimize recycling. I congratulate Westchester County. 50% recycling is for the county is very, very good. And you are invested in dual stream, which makes a whole lot of sense. The national average is 35%, and it's been stagnant for 20 years. We could talk about why, but I would say the main culprit is corporate monopolies in the field, who make far more money on garbage than they do on recycling. But there are, within this 35% national average, there are tremendous successes in Los Angeles, 73%. These cities that I'm naming now are close to 70%, San Francisco, Portland, Seattle, Oceanside, and closer to home in Bethlehem, New York, they're over 60%, suburb of Albany. The keys to getting there are no mystery. It's being done across the country. You don't have to invent anything. One of the top priorities is organics. Organics are your yard debris, your food waste, your soil papers, wood waste, etc. Keeping this material out of your land, out of the waste stream and the landfill is very, very important for the climate and for lowering your costs. When you use compost, you save water, you reduce methane, you reduce landfill leachate, which is the chemical soup that's caused when you mix everything together. And the costs for processing the material are very reasonable, and there is a year-round market for good compost. On the East Coast, Mid-Atlantic, it's worth about $75 a ton. The other beautiful thing about composting is that it sequesters carbon, which is good for the climate, and there are virtually no economies of scale. Excuse me, there are no economies of scale. You could compost in your backyard, you can compost in your garage with worms, and certainly you could have a community garden to raise food and educate young people. And finally, there are commercial size large cities need several of these because in composting, as in all waste management and recycling, you want redundancy. It's okay to have a little overcapacity in your composting. Therefore, rather than have one large compost facility in the middle of your jurisdiction, you would want to have a small circle of composting sites to reduce route traffic. Workers on a truck driving through your neighborhood is not very good and not very efficient. You want to minimize that for costs. When it gets to traditional recycling, again, there are tried and true measures. Unit pricing, sometimes called pay as you throw, in which the household resident family pays for garbage based on the amount they put out. But when they put out organics for composting collection, for reuse, or put out their materials for recycling, they don't pay. So there is a direct economic incentive for people to participate in recycling and composting. This benefits the family budget, and it does something very important when you add reuse into your program. And Dan and Mary Lou are going to talk extensively about reuse. I won't say much, except that it creates good jobs, jobs that hard to employ people can be trained in and to make a very decent living. In fact, repair and resale companies in computers and furniture, appliances, textiles are creating jobs that dramatically reduce recidivism. That is, people who are incarcerated and when they're released, we do not want them to go back to incarceration. And a good family wage and benefit job is a way to do that. We have examples in Baltimore of deconstruction companies having 3 years of no recidivism among workers who came out of incarceration, returning citizens. Also, repair helps bridge the digital divide. I'll sum up by saying that investing in zero waste and recycling, composting, reuse creates jobs. Austin, Texas has created 600 jobs, over $1 billion of economic activity. Oakland has created over 1,000 jobs in this field. There are other strategies. Clearly, taxing things we don't want is very important. Taxing packaging that is hard to recycle or hard to reuse is necessary. Taxing plastics that are not easily recyclable should be very heavily taxed, because a plastic that's manufactured that can't be recycled is pollution. And of course, we know that plastic is polluting the entire globe. Finally, there is success. Dan Knapp may be able to talk about Alameda and the Stop Waste program there that reduced waste 50% over about 10 years. In San Diego, there was a 50% reduction in just about 5 years. There are a lot of things that could be done nationally. I won't go into those now, but if you want new infrastructure for zero waste and all these facilities that we'll be discussing later, the federal government is now available for those types of investments. There are also ample opportunities for shared investment, local investment, shared savings, and greenbacks. And I'm going to end with one story about Urban Ore. They negotiated successfully with the government that for every ton of material that they pull out of the waste stream at the transfer station, they deserve the credit for keeping it out of the landfill, which is valued at about $41 a ton. And that's exactly the way recycling needs to be set up. Cost avoidance is added to the value of the materials, and then you will have an economic system that favors recycling and provides economic penalties for wasting. And thank you for your time.
Thank you, Neil. And we will move on to Mary Lou Van Deventer now. And Courtney will help with Mary Lou's slides.
Excellent. Excellent. Thank you very much. There we are. Okay, can we go into the full screen of there we go. But the cover, there we are. So the thing is, I'm hearing you will talk differently after today. You will speak differently, because what I'm hearing today is mostly waste language. It's language that was developed for the wasting industry, used by the wasting industry. And I'm not sure why, but I have various speculations, but most recyclers tend to use this language, and it is very detrimental to recycling and recovery and resource thought. I come into this whole field out of Friends of the Earth and the Sierra Club. For Friends of the Earth, I wrote a chapter in a policy book about resources. And when I was assigned that writing project and started into the research for it, it was shocking how much of our resource planetary is the planet. We are wasting the planet. Nobody ever said, God said, okay, take care of the planet. You're the shepherds of the planet. And he didn't say, go dig a hole and bury things so that you can't use them again. So, but that's what we've been doing. So here's how we got where we are. Next. Next slide. Courtney, there we go. It is the thought. Next, there we go. Okay, it is the thought that counts. Our thought constructs determine how we're going to proceed and behave. And the waste industry, bless its heart, got where it is naturally, but it's time to change. It was 50 years ago, it was time to change. The reuse and recycling industries don't see waste, and we don't talk about, Urban Ore doesn't handle waste. We don't bring in waste, we bring in resources. And then we behave differently with them. We behave respectfully with them rather than, oh, this is waste. This is just waste. Somebody didn't want it, therefore I'm going to dig a hole and bash it. No, we do different things because we value the resource and we value the craftsmanship. And even mass-produced IKEA furniture has some value because it's utilitarian and natural resources were taken from the planet and put into this stupid IKEA thing that breaks too easily. But nevertheless, if we treat it correctly, it can last longer. And that's the way we respect the planet and what we've been given. So, but you have to think about it correctly in order to see how many doors are open. Next slide. So what we call our traditional practices in our traditional industry, it's really only about a century old. In many places, it's not that old. In the late 1890s, the municipal housekeeping movement was launched, and it was in large part litter cleanup and disease prevention, because we used to have lots of diseases that came from the garbage. It was individual responsibility, and what people did with it was terrible things, and everybody made a different choice, but a lot of people just dumped stuff at the side of the road wherever they found a suitable side of the road. So in the late 19th century, we had a brilliant innovation. We organized the service. Excuse me. So discards were then dumped at the edge of the town in an organized way, or they were dumped into bodies of water. In this photograph, the lower photograph is a garbage scow going out into Long Island Sound. And it's just going to dump everything directly into the water because that's what they did. Or if you were progressive, you could reclaim the swamps by filling swamps. We would call that today polluting the wetlands, but that was very progressive at the time. Next slide. In the 1890s, there was one visionary in New York City whose name was Colonel George Waring Jr. He was, I think, a Civil War veteran. He was certainly an Army veteran. I'm not sure about the Civil War. Somebody may know on this call. He had a vision for the city of New York, and he organized the whole system of the city of New York, and he focused on cleanliness. So he was called the Apostle of Cleanliness, and he dressed the street sweepers in white because, they had horses in those days, and every horse poops 20 pounds of poop onto the city streets every day. Well, that requires some street cleanup and other kinds of cleanup. And he wanted to focus on not on the dirtiness, but on the cleaning. So he was the Apostle of Cleanliness. He organized the system, different system for different boroughs. And he wanted the whole system to pay for itself by selling the resources that it recovered. And it was starting to work, but then he died. And so the whole system reverted. Because as Neil pointed out, it's very profitable to waste, very profitable. Next slide. In 1930, skip forward, there were a lot of things that went on in the industry and a lot of practices were codified. But in 1938, the garbage compactor truck was invented in Detroit, Motor City. It was called the Garwood Packer truck because it was Garwood Industries that invented it. And one of the features of this truck is that it has a low place where you can dump your load. The old garbage trucks, the garbage guys had to put their 80-pound can on their back, carry it on their shoulder, and they called it 7 steps to heaven. They would go up 7 steps and dump into basically a box. And there would be a guy standing in the box sorting out string or sorting out this or that and putting it in bags that were hanging from the side of the inside of the truck. And he'd go home that night and shower and clean off the fleas that he had accumulated during the day. It was pretty nasty. The Garwood Packer truck didn't require you to get flea bitten. No, that's very nice. And it was real convenient for the users because you just put everything in one bin and throw it in the truck and away it goes. That's when we began out of sight, out of mind. But it's the perfect marriage between the truck and the landfill, because the landfill at that time, either only an incinerator or a landfill could accept that caliber of mixed resources. I won't use any nasty language here, but that is the manufacturing of garbage right there. You put everything into one bin and you mash it with a nice hydraulic system that manufactures garbage out of resources that could otherwise have been recovered. Next slide. So that system was used all over the place for decades. We, in fact, distributed that system throughout Europe and the South Seas during World War II, because we trained all of our Army Corps of Engineers how to use landfills. And you dump everything into a pit and cover it and with soil, and voila, it's sanitary, and you can move the Army forward. So all the Army engineers came back to this country, and in the 1950s, we had landfills and garbage compactor trucks in a perfect marriage for a couple of decades until Earth Day happened. Here is a shot that Dan Knapp took of the landfill, Berkeley's landfill in 1979. 35% of San Francisco Bay shoreline is fill of one kind or another. Most of it is solid waste, garbage fill, but there's construction fill, there's all kinds of fill. We polluted a lot of wetlands. Next slide. But it isn't really land. You know, the park, now it's a park that was made on top of that dump, looks like the upper left-hand corner, but cross section is in the lower right-hand corner. I'm getting a note of some kind. I have to speed up. Oh, I really have to speed up. Okay, next.
I'm going to interrupt and say we have enough material for a few days, but if people want to listen, we will.
Okay, I'm gonna run through this. Next slide. This is a NASA image. Goddard Space Center colored the methane green, and as the Earth rotates, the methane spins to the poles. Methane is 100 times worse than carbon dioxide for global warming and climate change. And landfills are the largest human-created source of methane. So why are the Antarctic shelves breaking off? Okay, next slide. It's important to think accurately and to perceive accurately, and you need good language for that. You need resource language. Next. Waste language. In waste language, you call everything waste that somebody throws out. It's waste. It's inevitable for it to be disposed of through wasting, which is burning and or burying. And golly, you're a hero if you divert it from its true destiny by recycling it. Next slide. In resource language, you don't have a true destiny of any kind. You just have some stuff that you don't want. So you discard it and you have a choice of how to dispose of it. You can waste it or you can reuse or recycle it. And you can also divert resources from being wasted. Next. So in the two language patterns, in the wasting pattern, nobody has any power. Wasting just happens. In the resource pattern, the chooser has power to decide what to do with that resource. Next slide. In the wasting language pattern, nobody has any responsibility. It's the tragedy of the commons. In the resource pattern, the people who make the choice have responsibility for the choices they make. Next slide. So which language pattern lets resource recovery thrive, reuse and recycling? It's the discards, it's the resource language that lets recovery thrive, because it's an equal choice. It's an independent set of industries, and you can choose them. That means you can also build them. Next slide. This is Dan Knapp's 12 master categories of resources. This is market categories. I share the copyright. It's copyright 1989, and we copyrighted it just to copyright it, but everybody's free to use it. Please give us attribution. Give Dan's the primary thinker, attribution. Notice that this is the only set of profile categories I've ever seen that includes reusable goods, because reusable goods can come from any single category and is the only category that can come easily from mixed categories. You can have metals and glass mixed together, and you can recover them. And he developed these categories based on what markets already existed in 1989. So these are marketable categories. Next slide. And as befits industrial development, you really need economic development. If economic development people are in here, here's the goal, because the reuse, recycling, and composting industries are different industries. They have different income sources, and they also have different product sales profiles. So recovery, you can have tipping fees and you can have product sales. In garbage, nobody wants to buy that product. All you get is a long-term liability. Next slide. Also, the different sectors of the recovery industries, they all have different expenses as well. So you can look at these expenses. We developed this method of analyzing for a set of plans that we did for the state of West Virginia, where we designed transfer stations, both urban and rural, and they can interact with each other and pass things back and forth and process them in whatever location is most appropriate. And you can analyze them. These are collapsed a little bit. There are another couple of columns that show how many tons and what's the price per ton. And all it is an Excel spreadsheet, and you change the price per ton or the number of tons, and it'll automatically calculate. But you can do that kind of analysis with recovery operations. You wouldn't care to bother with just wasting, because you have tipping fees and you have the usual expenses of equipment maintenance and so on. Next slide. Next. Okay, and this is Alameda County. This was in 2000. What year was this, Dan?
Oh, it was 80, let's see.
No,
This
2000 something.
it was 19 years after 89, I think, whatever that is.
Yeah, that sounds right. 2008, I think. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so by 2008, in 19 years, Alameda County, which is in the map there, the sort of peach colored area, that's Alameda County. It's very large. It's very high population. It's a mix of urban and rural. There's a lot of rural area in there. But the county achieved 50% recycling, or 50% landfill reduction. And that, all these diversion figures are in themselves a diversion, because you're measuring the wrong thing. What you want to know
I just realized that this is from 2014. Second sentence down, 2014.
Thank you.
50%.
Okay, so the thing you want to measure is how much is being landfilled or wasted in the incinerator. How much is being wasted? And that's what you want to bring to zero. Any way you can do that. And the way you're going to do it is by developing recovery industries. And that's economic development. Next slide. So that's what Urban Ore does. You saw at the beginning, you saw all those rotating photos of Urban Ore. We have 3 acres, 40 employees. They start at like $20 an hour. We have full benefits. people who are formerly incarcerated are not actually very good candidates, because every single person in our company can negotiate on behalf of the company and also handle cash. And we have tried to handle formerly incarcerated people, and I don't want to tempt anybody whose background is thievery. Their barrier to doing that again is very low, and it's no favor to them to put them in a place where they're going to handle cash. But having said that, there are a lot of people who are very good for this job if they like people. There's a lot of human interaction. So do pigs fly? Yes, they do. And we can show that. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mary Lou, and we'll pass it over to Dan now, and Courtney will bring up your slideshow.
Oh, great. Okay, so if you could put the first one on. While we're getting ready for that, I'd just like to mention that the EPA pie chart that you showed, Caitlin, did not have a category for reusable goods, which is just a long-term problem with EPA. Now they're starting to change, and they've actually funded us to do a slideshow for them about reuse. So things are changing within that organization. I'm going to try to move through this quicker because I want to get to interaction with people and get some idea of what people are thinking about here. But here we're looking down on the roof of our main building, and you can see the parking is pretty full. That's the way it is every day. This is a 30,000 square foot building. And out and back on the east side, there's another 2 acres or so of material that's out of doors, but the big building is right there. Next. We're a mission-driven for-profit reuse, retail, and recycling facility. Our mission is to end the age of waste. I set that for the company a long time ago. I read a book from Stanford University. They said, hey, you want to make your company into a 100-year company? Pick a goal you'll never reach. So I thought, what's that going to be? Well, let's end the age of waste. So here's little Urbanor trying to end the age of waste. But we're doing a pretty good job. Anyway, we did 3.5 million gross revenue in 21. Roughly, we're going to probably do 3.6 or more this year. We have 42 employees this year now. Lots of regular contractors. We think we're handling about 7,000 to 10,000 tons per year. We know exactly how much landfilling we do. 80 tons went to landfill. That's roughly about 1% of everything we handle. And everything we handle is discarded. So, you could say, hey, we're a zero waste facility, darn near. Anyway, 3 acres of land, West Berkeley, very expensive place to have land. Long story how we got there. Next slide. This is looking at us from above. You can see San Francisco Bay up at the top. And that's a big highway there, Ashby Avenue, coming off of Interstate 80, which is down below a little bit. That's our building before we did the new roof and put the solar collectors on top. The solar collectors, which you saw a few minutes ago, that's a 75 kilowatt solar array. When we did that, our electric bill went from $2,400 a month to $28 a month. Pretty interesting. This is our site looking down on it. You can see we're probably the second biggest building in that whole array of buildings. Next. And here we are out at the dump. Mary Lou already talked about that, but I'll tell you from my experience, I used to walk down at the bottom of this area and people would actually throw things toward me or at me. And they did it with our other salvagers too. It's a kind of a weird, strange, surreal place, a landfill, but that's where we started. And we had a low accident rate and we were able to get insurance and all that stuff. Next. So we did one big investment that paid off hugely. We spent $25 and had a person make this sign for us. All we did was set it by the side of the road on the way to the tipping area. And all of a sudden we had about an acre of dropped off appliances. And it was so much easier than going after him, going down into the pit. The guy that's helping unload that refrigerator there was Steve Dervinsky. He's one of the original founders. He's now deceased. Next. That's me in the red pants that I found in the dump. And Yaney McIver, who was a stalwart helper out there at the dump. We're loading or moving a barrel full of light aluminum. That's called sheet aluminum, and it's got one price, and then there's other kinds of aluminum that have different prices. If you know the prices, you can make more money. The person on the right is bargaining with a customer out at the dump. We didn't have any roof or anything like that. Everything got wet if it rained. It got dusty when it was blowing, which was most of the time. Next. We moved, this slide didn't come through so well. We just moved from the dump. I'll just say what we did. We moved from the dump to the transfer station in 1983. Long story how that happened. The organization called Save the Bay got the Corps of Engineers to rule that Berkeley had to close its landfill by 1983. And we did close on time, but the solution that they proposed was an incinerator. And I'll talk about that in a minute because it didn't happen. Next. This is where the site of this is the site that the Berkeley owned. It's 7.2 acres from top to bottom. Ashby Avenue, the big street, is right there. Actually, no, Gilman Street, rather. It's another one of the streets that comes off of Interstate 80. So it's very busy all the time, that street. And that's Second Street there, and then there's railroad tracks on the other side. What happened was when we stopped the incinerator, all of a sudden 66,000 square feet of property became vacant. There was nothing to put there, and they had no plan B. So it ended up going to urban ore, believe it or not. So here we were out at the dump with no roof, and all of a sudden we have a roof, two roofs actually, that shed. And over here, the another building that Mary Lou helped stop them from tearing down. That became city offices later. But anyway, we moved on to that 66,000 square feet. Next. And this is now we're going to sort of review the departments that Urban Ore has. We're fast forwarding to now. We have 5 major departments. One is salvage and recycling. This is Samuel Melendez, and he's very proudly showing off a whole lot of extruded aluminum. That's one of the highest grades of aluminum. In those barrels down at the bottom in those boxes are things like brass and copper. We get all that kind of material all the time. We put out about a truckload like this once a week or once every other week. But that's a very small part of our income these days. Mostly it's reuse. Next. So this is a building materials department. We handle doors, windows, lumber, Cluffet tubs, all kinds of tubs, garden stuff. It's a huge part of the business. And here we are. That's me actually in the holding up a door, probably a solid core, and taking a bunch more off that truck there. We do assisted unloading, and that means we help people unload their trucks. Doesn't happen in landfills usually. Bye. Next, please. Next. This is inside of the building. We have a receiving department for what we call the general store. It handles tons and tons of small items, all kinds of things, jewelry, hardware, all kinds of stuff. So there's a tremendous amount of sorting that happens. And you can see we have a belt or actually a rolling conveyor kind of thing for boxes that come in. They come in by the dozens every day. We get about 100 vehicle loads a day of material coming in, and it all has to be sorted and taken somewhere really fast. The 2 women on the right are sorting at the hardware department, but the stuff that they're sorting is actually going to be recycled, so it goes to salvage and recycling, and they are the ones that haul it away and get money for it as scrap. Next. Next slide. This is looking down at about 1/3 of the total floor in that large building. And you're looking at clothing in the foreground, you're looking at household goods, you're looking at cabinets and all kinds of furniture. It's a huge, huge place, and it's got a lot of stuff. I won't be showing you all of it. It's just too big. Next. We have an outside trader department. They go out on trucks, these box trucks, and they pick up loads from all over the place and bring them to the mothership, and then they unload there. So we do that every day. Next. And we also, by the way, salvage at the city transfer station. Here's some of the measurable economic benefits that we know about, totaling about $836,000. Purchases for resale is actually a 2017 number. So we're just estimating at the same as 2017, but it's probably gone up a little bit. We do buy things from time to time. Then we collect sales tax. This is very important to understand. Reuse, unlike recycling, will usually generate sales taxes if you have a government that gets its money that way. So we have a 10% sales tax here. And right now our sales tax bill, the amount of sales tax we collect for the state is over $30,000 a month. Property taxes, we own the property we're on, most of it. And in any event, we have to pay the landlord's property taxes anyhow. And so altogether, it's about $140,000 that goes to government. Payroll taxes goes to governments. So altogether, other than the 56,000, you have about $700,000 going to governments, and that's not all of it, but that's just some. Next. This is a kind of a fascinating one, because over on the left, you can see that we salvaged from the dump 729 tons of material. We have 3 guys down there every day, and it's all covered by insurance, and our insurance companies know we're doing it. And yes, we have a very low accident rate. So we get a real good rate on insurance. How much was dumped in the same period? 80 tons, 80 tons, 80 tons. That's very small. The amount we recycled is 335 tons. The amount that we think we reused is somewhere in the neighborhood of 7, maybe 8,000 tons. Next. So this is part of the software. All right, do you want me to stop?
No, that's me, Dan. I'm just sorry that the slide got messed up that way.
Oh, well, that's all right. So here we are. We're now looking at the city's way of looking at us. And this is, you can see that it's a whereas thing. There were a bunch of other whereases, but we cut them out. But the most important thing is that they accepted our terminology here, because we call these things, all these different functions that are recycling, we call them material recovery enterprises. And we defined that and wrote that into the Berkeley Municipal Code. So you can now put businesses like Berkeley into lands that are zoned mixed use light industrial as of right, if you're a material recovery enterprise. And there's the statute here, it defines what that is. So that's part of the enabling structure that cities can do when they get behind recycling and make it happen and incentivize it. That helps tremendously. And what we have then is something that we call an ecology of commerce. And it's 6 different enterprises, 3 of which are publicly owned. So the city here is recognizing that, and they're recognizing the concept of ecology of commerce. It wasn't always that way. Early on, they wanted to burn everything. They wanted one single contract, just like most of your governments there probably do. That's not the best way to go. You want to have a lot of diversity. The last one here is an interesting one. Back in 2018, they said the commission said and the council said, analyze the structure of fees that are paid to recovery operators to assure Berkeley's whole system can function reliably in the face of changing markets. Well, they just completed that study about a month and a half ago, and they raised the tipping fee at the transfer station for waste from 126 a ton to 149 a ton. That's a big boost. Anybody that goes through that fee gate has a tremendous incentive to use urban ore and other facilities, any other facility that'll take stuff legally, and that's what we do. So the service that we provide is the service of disposal. Next. And this is a flow chart that we've done showing the 12 market categories in the center with these chasing arrows saying planet-friendly disposal. What this does is it shows you that there are commonalities in some of these. The recycling area, for example, needs a baler, it needs forklifts, it needs bins, it needs a whole lot of things like that. It needs a check writing facility. I can go on and on about what it needs, but all of those materials, all of those 6 market categories are handled in that one area. So that means that you can have a lot of different operators operating there, and they can be exchanging resources and being specialists. So that's one way to go with economic development. Another big area of where you're dealing with a whole lot of weight. Everything's done by weight in this field, and the compost area and the soils area are the ones where the biggest amount of weight is handled. So you can see there that there's also clusters. Here you got to have loaders, you got to have screens, you've got to have shredders and crushers to handle this stuff properly. And so that leads you to have a cluster of businesses that are all kind of operating on in the same set of market categories, but they're doing different things with it. Ceramics area is also part of that. So this is how the clustering really works. And when you're designing, then you want to have an area for reuse, you want to have an area for recycling, you want to have an area for composting, and part of that is soils and part of that is ceramics. And all together, everything comes back and you're making and using new products. So this is a pretty complicated flow chart, but it's a beautiful thing. And I encourage you to make it into a poster if you want. Next. This is an actual site plan that never was built, but it illustrates really well the clustering. You have the reuse cluster up on top. You want the reuse at the very beginning because all the good reusable stuff, you want it to be on top of the load when it comes in. So it's not all down below and you have to take everything else off the top of it and there'll be damage. So you want reuse to go first. And there has to be parking for reuse. So you can see there's parking here. And then you get into recycling and now you've got a buyback and you've got drop off and you've got curbside collectors coming in. And there's a cluster of operations, which could be one business or it could be 10 businesses. Then down further, you get into the composting area, composting and crushing, and you've got all that stuff coming in there, plant debris, food, soils, etc. And finally, at the end of the line, after you've gone through all this, you come to wasting at the very end. You don't want to put wasting at the very beginning. That incentivizes wasting. You want to put it at the end and make it also expensive. So there might be a place down here to take an additional tipping fee if by the time you get there, you haven't gotten rid of everything else. But this whole system that you see here rewards order. It rewards doing things right by the materials. Next.
Dan, thank you so much. I'm going to cut you a little short here just because I want to make sure that Tracy and Bob get their turns and that we have a little bit of time for questions.
Can I do that last one, just real
I
quick?
think that we pulled down the slides,
Right.
unfortunately. I'm sorry about that.
It's the biggest one we ever did, which was in England, and it's a village. Figured we'd be able to employ 850 people. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dan. And Tracy, you are on deck.
Okay, great. Thank you. So my talk is food scrap composting, which, as we've heard, is the low hanging fruit. Next. Food waste, and I'm calling it food waste to refer to wasted food and food scraps. It's a #1 material in America's landfills, accounting for almost a quarter of all of what's called municipal solid waste. It's also the #1 material in America's incinerators. About 40% of the food produced in the US goes uneaten, and the average family of 4 throws away $1,500 worth of food per year. So not only is it of concern because of all this waste, but in landfills, materials are compacted on a daily basis and they're wet. This makes for an anaerobic environment, absence of oxygen, and so methane is produced from organic materials. Methane is 82 times higher in global warming potential than CO2 over a 20-year time period. Next. If food loss and waste were its own country, it would be the 3rd largest greenhouse gas emitter in the world after China and the US. Next. Okay, New York has attempted to address this issue with the food donation and food scraps recycling law, which went into effect in January of this year. It requires large generators of food scraps, more than 2 tons of wasted food and food scraps per week, to do 2 things: separate and donate edible food to food pantries, food banks, etc., and to separate and recycle all remaining food scraps if they're located within 25 miles of an organic recycler. What's an organic recycler? It's either an anaerobic digester or a compost operation that take wasted food and food scraps. Next. Other states are like Vermont and California are moving much faster than New York to keep food scraps out of landfills. As of 2020, disposal of food scraps in the trash and in landfills was banned in Vermont. Interestingly, Vermont requires trash haulers to offer food scrap collection services to businesses, schools, and apartments where there's 4 or more units, unless there's another hauler that's willing to provide that service. Next. California has an even more far-reaching piece of legislation that's known as SB 1383. It aims to reduce emissions of short-lived climate pollutants, such as methane. It went into effect this year. It requires every city, county, and solid and special waste collection district to provide organic waste collection services to all residents and businesses. It has 2 far-reaching goals. By 2025, reduce the amount of compost materials disposed of in landfills by 75% in 3 years, and rescue at least 20% of edible food that's currently being disposed of for human consumption. It applies to everyone, all residents, all businesses, all schools and colleges, and non-local entities. And it imposes fines of up to $10,000 per violation per day on municipalities that don't have a plan to keep food scraps out of landfills. And it requires every city, town, and county to conduct annual reviews of residential and commercial carts and bins to monitor for contamination and proper sorting in the compost cart or bin. It's amazing. I don't know how well it's being implemented, but I do want to say that in New York State, localities and counties can enact stronger solid waste management laws. And I say solid waste management because that's what the legal term is in New York. Next. Okay, I've mentioned curbs, I've mentioned residential collection. I happened to write a story about the first residential food waste collection that was made available to all households in 2 communities, and that was 10 years ago. Of note, they did a pilot project with 600 households, and they found that people were putting on average 15 pounds of wasted food and food scraps in their green bins per week. This can make a huge difference. Next. Okay, Westchester County actually commissioned a food waste study. The report came out in January 2020, and here are the main recommendations. The interim solution, which is currently in effect, residential food waste collected at voluntary drop-off programs in municipalities is trucked to Ulster County, which has a large food waste composting operation. The recommendations for the future, and I will return to this in a bit, are using anaerobic digesters at the Yonkers and Peekskill wastewater treatment plants. So food scraps would be mixed with sewage sludge, and also citing an anaerobic digester at the Wheelabrator Westchester trash incinerator in Peekskill. And then long-term, the consultants recommended citing a very large anaerobic digester on 3 acres in Valhalla. And there were some other possible solutions that were discussed. Next. Okay, I'm going to compare anaerobic digestion and composting because there is a choice, as Mary Lou mentioned, on a variety of things. Okay, so anaerobic digesters are basically large pieces of equipment, metal equipment, often high tech. They, under anaerobic conditions, microbes digest organic materials, food waste, yard debris, manure, sewage sludge, you name it, they can do it. When they're digesting in the absence, these materials in the absence of oxygen, they generate methane, that potent greenhouse gas. And that methane can be burned to produce electricity and providing some income, some revenues for these projects. Anaerobic digesters, however, leak 2 to 3% of the methane they produce, releasing this very potent greenhouse gas into the atmosphere. They also emit air pollutants, and odor problems are common. So if you can turn to the compost slide. Composting operations have much lower capital investments. Microbes break down these organic materials in the presence of oxygen. And because they're doing this under aerobic conditions, they don't tend to produce any methane because methane needs anaerobic conditions. Unpleasant odors are not typical. They indicate there's a problem with the composting process that needs to be addressed. And composting does release some carbon dioxide, which comes from the microbes respiring. Back to the anaerobic digestion, please. When the digestion is complete, there's solids remaining, but these solids readily leach nutrients, which can pollute groundwater and surface water. So the digestate, as it's called, is not a healthy soil amendment unless it's composted. Turn to the next slide, please, to the compost, please. Next. Okay. Yes. So as we know, compost is a healthy soil amendment. It enhances soil fertility, and it's also a tool for climate resilience. Compost increases the water holding capacity of soil, which is good in a drought, and it's good when there's excess precipitation. And most importantly, composting, there's a strong market demand for quality compost. And I underline the word quality. If you treat compost like a garbage dump, you will not, it's not going to be a good material to put on the soil. Next. Next slide, please.
Sorry, Tracy, I'm having trouble advancing it for some reason.
Oh, okay. Can't remember what comes next.
Oh, here we go.
Okay. So the other, so the recommendation that anaerobic digestion be used for food waste in Westchester County is a cause of concern because it produces a material. First, it produces methane. Secondly, it produces a material that would need to be composted before it has any value for soil. But there's another even stronger concern, and that is the report refers to potential PFAS contamination of sewage sludge. PFAS is a class of chemicals that's often known as forever chemicals because they're extremely persistent and they're also toxic. PFAS contamination is not potential. PFAS contamination is ubiquitous in sewage sludge, according to peer-reviewed studies. The way that this class of chemicals gets into sewage sludge is that it's in a number of commercial and consumer products, ranging from dental floss and cosmetics to floor wax, car wax, and water resistant, stain resistant, and oil resistant textiles and carpeting, etc. So these are things that are in many people's homes, and they get into our wastewater systems from cleaning, from washing, etc. And the other thing about PFAS is this class of chemicals has been linked to a number of cancers, liver and kidney damage, the disruption of our hormone systems, and also immune system problems. So we really don't need to be putting, oh, and another fun fact about PFAS is not only do they persist for centuries in soil and water, but they're taken up by plants. And then when animals or humans eat them, they bioaccumulate in our bodies. So the fact that PFAS is in sewage sludge, I think should make mixing food waste in with sewage sludge to be anaerobically digested, it should make it a non-starter. It should totally eliminate that possibility. So this has been a really big issue in Maine. This is from one of the largest newspapers in Maine. And in the spring, the state legislature banned the use of sewage sludge as a fertilizer or in compost for use on farms because of the risk of PFAS poisoning. This is the first state in the country to do that. And also, as if that's not bad enough, the Office of the Inspector General of the US EPA, can you turn back, please? Anyway, released a report exactly 4 years ago entitled EPA Unable to Assess the Impact of Hundreds of Unregulated Pollutants in Land Applied Biosolids on Human Health and the Environment. Biosolids is the regulatory term for sewage sludge. Next. Okay, so Westchester County, with its large population, needs multiple food scrap composting operations, and they can take different forms. They can be public, they can be county administered and operated, they can be municipal, they can be on farm. I know there are not many farms, but it is it could be a very suitable enterprise for a farm. They can be private. They can be community run. And we can just go through the rest of the slides very quickly to see a few of the many manifestations of composting operations. And community composting can be large or small. I just want to say one more thing because someone brought it up in the chat. Contaminants in compost are also a serious issue. Microplastics, because of plastic that gets in composting, as well as PFAS. PFAS is still present in some food packaging, and I'm not sure that the law banning PFAS in food packaging is going to be effective the way the DEC is implementing it. And finally, compostables are not the answer. Oregon composters came out with a statement several years ago calling for compostable packaging and utensils not to be sent with food waste because they contaminate the compost. They contaminate the screens when compost is screened, etc. Okay, thank you very much. I'm going to turn it over to Bob Spencer.
Thanks so much, Tracy. Take it away, Bob. You there, Bob?
Hi. Sorry, I had mute on. So
Happens to the best of us.
can we go to the first slide? I'm sorry. Yeah. Anyway, I want to thank our sponsors for this opportunity, and we have so many examples out there to take us to zero waste. And right here in Brattleboro, Vermont, we are doing so much to implement that. And I'm going to show you what we have in place for the last 10 years. So next. Brattleboro is a small city in Vermont, but it's the largest town in our district. And they started food waste collection in 2012. Next. And we compost it in a very low tech system with a turning machine. I mean, we use a loader and a screen. That's it. Next. The town adopted this logo for their curbside collection program. Next. Because they have an annual ski jumping festival. Next. The town provides containers at a low cost, and you can use any sealed container for your food scraps. Weekly collection of recycling, weekly collection of food scraps, and every other week collection of trash, and that really makes people recycle. Next. We take so many materials, basically all the organics, and there's the list. We take paper and cardboard. We're about diversion, not necessarily having the highest quality compost, although we do have a very good product. It's not certified organic. Next. We have a great partnership with a local company. Next. That's the weekly load, about 12 tons from the Brattleboro program. You can see we have a lot of paper and cardboard. Next. And we take their yard waste. Next. So we heard about some recycling rates in California, and Brattleboro's residential, because they don't collect the commercial portion, is in 19 was 65%. It's about the same. And I like to say it's a green program. And in Brattleboro, the dollars are important to the select board. And we have been saving quite a bit on composting diversion to the tune of about $30,000 a year versus trash. Next. We take commercial, industrial, institutional, residential food scraps. And this is a bread manufacturer. Next. And we have a gluten-free bread company. A lot of eggshells. Our compost has little white flakes in it and people go, oh, what's that? It's slow release calcium. That's what I say. Little fragments of eggshells. Next. So we get organics from various sources. Right here. Next. We have to adhere to the Vermont regulations, which includes temperatures weekly. Next. Yeah, you can see what the ban on food waste disposal has done. And like Tracy said, it's like a law and it's really working. Next. Yep, same thing. Next.
Sorry, Bob,
That's
trying to
all right.
move us along. And yet. Okay, there we go.
So we've hit our permanent capacity. And
Bob,
we
I think we're
have a
having
little
some
facility that
issues with your
controls
internet.
leachate runoff. And
Bob, can you repeat?
right
that?
now,
Yeah, go again, say that again, because we had some issue.
You can turn off your
all right, can you
video if
hear
you
me?
like. Yeah, it's just a little bit choppy. We're gonna wrap it up anyways, but I think you're close to the end of your presentation.
Yes, can you hear me?
Yeah, just go ahead.
Okay, so we're building a new facility and I could talk a lot about that, so we'll just move on.
Thank you, Bob.
Marketing the product is so important and it takes years to develop it. We did a branding called Brattle Grow compost, and we make sure we test the product, and it's actually sold out every year. Next. And we make money on this business. So we're a public authority. So we're not a private company, but my board has 18 towns and they want to make sure we're doing, the most cost-effective programs. So our compost facility is a profit maker. We have the branded name of Brattle Grow Compost. Next. We have private distributors. And we do some good donations to schools and community gardens. And it's a great program. Keep your sense of humor. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Bob.
You're welcome.
Okay, put my video back on here. In the interest of respecting everybody's time, we will have a question and answer period, but we are cognizant that we were supposed to end at 8:30. So I am going to share my screen with next steps for those of you that need to pop off. I see that Mike has already put in the chat different items, action items that you can do. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Thank you for your patience. Almost there. There's me. Okay, so where do we go from here? Next steps to move Westchester County towards zero waste. Sign on to request that Westchester County hires a zero waste consultant. The link is dropped in the chat. Sign on to the Westchester Food Scraps Composting Pledge. Again, it's in the chat. And advocate for your municipality to adopt a zero waste resolution. And a resolution is in the chat. And then I will stop sharing. And I just want to thank everybody who has stayed on. And please, please stay if you are able. And Tracy will take some questions for our panelists.
Yes, I will. I just lost my my list of questions. I will be back with questions in a moment. I'm sorry.
Or Mike, if you
Oh, no,
have.
I have them. Sorry about that. Too many screens. So the first question is for Caitlin, and Caitlin, if you don't know the answer, fine, we will get back to people. Is the 50% recycling rate what the material recovery facility takes in, or what is actually sent out and recycled?
So my understanding, and I would welcome like Neil to jump in here or somebody else, that the recycling rate is relative to the amount of municipal solid waste in tons. So like, I believe it was like, if I was going to grab my paperwork, that it was 2 million, or if there was, for example, if it was 390,000 tons of municipal solid waste that was incinerated at Wheelabrator, that the tonnage of recycling was similar to that, if that makes sense.
Okay.
And please, if somebody knows better, jump in and correct me. Neil?
Yeah, there's recycling rate is the amount of material that gets processed through the system, but that does not necessarily mean that everything delivered to the processing center gets recycled. Your system does use dual stream, which is excellent. A good dual stream system has a contamination rate of maybe 5%. That's an industry standard, compared to a single stream, which could be 30%, 20% contamination. Some cities are getting it down to 11 and 12%. And that is what's referred to as what gets delivered to the mill is what gets recycled, not necessarily the total tonnage that gets delivered to the processing center. So the recycling rate of 50%, take away 5%, and you'll get a more realistic level, assuming you have a 5% contamination rate.
Okay, thank you. The next question is, what is done with plastics number 3 to 7, as there's no market for them? Someone also asked if there's any capacity, if Westchester has a capacity to recycle up to number 7.
I can field that, Tracy.
Okay, yeah, go ahead.
So the first part of the question was, can you repeat it, please?
Sure. What does the material recovery facility in Westchester do with plastics number 3 to 7? There is no market for them. There's actually is a market for 5, but for the others, yes.
Right. Okay. So I'm really just repeating here what the Deputy Commissioner of the Department of Environmental Facilities has said, that what they will do is they will bundle number 1s and 2s that are really desirable, and put them in, like put 3s and 4s and 7s in and sell it as a group, so that they all go. And I asked him a follow-up question. I said, how do you know what happens to them? Because basically the buyer really wants the 1s and 2s. And I said, is there anything that's done to make sure that they're truly recycled? And I think that's beyond the scope. It's a sale. So, when you're selling somebody something, you just don't know what happens.
Yes, plastic brokers do want those, the mixed things, and they sort them with optical scanners, and they might be able to take out some 5s, they might find some 1s and 2s. And that's why they take them, but then they have all the other material, all the other plastics, which might go for chemical recycling, which is not recycling, or as
Mm.
as fuel for a cement kiln or something
Yeah.
that is not recycling.
If I could make a brief statement, then I see Mary Lou wants to add something. I would say that there is now a race for recycling plastic mechanically and versus incinerating it. The industry, the oil industry is pushing EPA to get burning plastic through a process called pyrolysis, declared non-incineration, like Ewall and Dan Knapp can give you more details on that. But there are very positive things happening as well. A lot of the film plastics, 6, 7s, and so on, are being recycled. Plants are being built across the country to recycle that, which is why I say it's a race. Who's going to get that plastic? And of course, legislation and ordinances can help. If you ban incineration, then the people who want to recycle the material legitimately have an advantage. And once again, I'll say, if you don't like it, tax it. If you can't recycle plastic, tax it. And that's the old American way.
Is there someone else? Oh, so two people have raised their hand. Mary Lou, do you want to say something, or does anyone else? I can't see the people's hands.
I would like to just make a very fast comment that it seems to me to make, I don't know this for a fact, but it seems to me to make sense that the fussier people are about what numbers of plastics you give them, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. If they're fussy about the number you give them, they want to recycle it. If they're not fussy, they want to burn it. There are a lot of plastics in California that go down to Mexico and they get incinerated.
Thank you. Anyone else want to speak? And Caitlin, can you call on them? Because I can't see. Oh, I can see maybe.
I don't see anyone else. I think we could move on to the next question.
Okay, so this one we can answer. New York State, the New York State food scraps law does not apply to school districts. Very interesting compared to what we see in California. A special waste collection district is a term used in California. It's not relevant to New York. We may or may not have that, but I don't believe that exists in Westchester County. What's produced when methane is burned? Carbon dioxide is produced. Also, I should say that the methane produced in anaerobic digesters is not pure methane. It has other things in it like hydrogen sulfide. Hence the air pollutants. Let me go back. Is there a difference in what type of materials can be used in anaerobic digestion versus composting? Anaerobic digestion can handle wetter materials, but in composting, when you get wet materials like from food processing, you simply need to have more wood chips. You cannot compost food waste alone. You compost it with browns like
Tracy, I could add some information. There's an anaerobic digester plant just about to open in Jessup, Maryland, which is equidistant between Baltimore and DC. It's 120,000 ton per year capacity. They don't want yard debris because it has much less nutrition value, if I could use a non-scientific term. If you deliver materials with just good, clean food scraps with no plastic contamination. Don't quote me on these prices, but you could pay in the low 40s. If you have a lot of contamination, you'll pay in the mid 50s. So they really are going after pre-consumer waste from the grocery stores, from the packaging plants and the manufacturers, where they're getting almost pure food waste, whereas from the households, they're getting food scraps, I should say, with all kinds of plastic and contamination. There's one other thing, 120,000 tons capacity is enormous for this area. And if you invest in that, this is a private company, by the way, but if you invest in something that size, it means you're cutting off access to source separated food scraps to other composters and other companies. And which would you rather have? One giant plant that may have a lot of leaking in it on the plastic, on the methane conversions and transfers, or do you want a whole network of composters and known technology that is very job intensive and produces very high quality topsoil, which everyone needs in every part of the country. So
Absolutely.
the scale is an issue as well as the technology.
Right. And so that's why I think it's really important to recommend to Westchester County and to put, to advocate for multiple composting operations, and also to advocate against giving a contract to a big waste company to compost. They do get involved with this, but they're not interested in the kind of quality that will produce, that will make the compost marketable and beneficial to the soil.
I'm sorry to add, I'd like to add one other thing. In Montgomery County, where we're doing this study, Dan and Mike are involved in it. The AD is a big issue here, what to do with the food scraps. And we hired, of course, part of our team, an expert on anaerobic digestion. And I would suggest, since I understand that York County, Westchester is about to make a major commitment to a hauling contract to a large AD plant, get a community-based review of that technology and their financing. And I'd be very happy to recommend a top expert that we're working with in Montgomery County, Maryland.
Thank you. That's very useful. Let me see. There's not many other questions. Are the people of the county pre-sorting before collection? I'm not sure what that means. I mean, there's recycling collection and there's disposal or waste collection. There's so I'm sorry.
For the majority of, I'm not sure if I'm interpreting this correctly, but for the majority of the county, it's dual stream. So we have one day where it's paper and cardboard that's picked up, and then another day where it's glass and plastic and metal.
Yeah.
So I don't know if that's maybe what the person was referring to.
It's not clear, but I would like to just state that many things are recyclable that are not collected curbside, and we tend to just forget about them. So the final question is, are there any methods to filter PFAS out of sewage similar to the activated carbon filtration technology used on drinking water? That's a great question. To my knowledge, there isn't any filtration used in wastewater treatment plants in New York and probably elsewhere. I've read extensively, and New York has not been testing sewage sludge, whereas some other states have been doing that. And some other states like New Hampshire require that generators, that is wastewater districts, and any other generators would be testing it. But New York, there has been virtually no testing. 8 to 10 wastewater treatment plants have been tested in 5 years ago. So it's a good idea, but until wastewater treatment plants their feet are held to the fire about the PFAS, I don't think anything's going to happen there. So I think that brings us to the end of the questions.
Tracy, you've got Dan has raised his hand.
Okay, I can't. Caitlin, Dan, you want to speak?
Yep, go ahead, Dan.
Okay, here I go. Well, here's the thing. As part of the preparation for this, I put together a 27-page, I think, set of excerpts from a very interesting interview that we did for Recycling Archives with an architect. His name is Mark Orell. He's now deceased. He's been gone for about 10 years. He was my best friend in many ways. And we worked together on about 30 different big recycling tasks, including Berkeley and various others. Much of what we do in Berkeley now is working within designs that he came up with. My point here is, first of all, I sent it to Tracy and Caitlin with the idea that you could send it out to everybody that's on this list. And then they could look at it if they want and read it if they want. It's really got a lot of interesting insights about the design process. But the more important thing that I want to bring across is that it was done by a sociologist and an architect. And we did all these designs that way. And we aren't engineers. And my thought is that you there in Westchester County have lots of architects and lots of sociologists and lots of other people that could be working on this. And you need to open up the design process so that those people can get in. What happens all too often is you get an RFP and the only thing you end up getting is a bunch of engineers who mostly are trained to look at recycling as a form of waste, and that they have the wrong set of concepts and generally make lots of mistakes that they don't really take responsibility for because they keep making them over and over again. So, you know, in order to really get at this problem, you have to figure out how to open up your processes so that they can be more fair and more encouraging to the kind of entrepreneurial energy that has built recycling all in its best form all over this country. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm sure we will send those out.
Absolutely.
I found two more questions, and I'm sorry about questions in the chat. I was relying on Mike Ewald to put questions in a Google Doc, so I didn't have to go through the whole chat. But let me read these. I think Bob Spencer may have left. Someone asked him to describe how individual homeowners get their food scraps to the street, and usually they're small containers that people bring to their large containers, 13-gallon or 40-gallon.
And there's usually screw top containers, so there are no odors and no contamination gets in. It's a very convenient system. The drivers pick up a full bucket and leave an empty, clean bucket. It's a very simple system. It's happening all over the country.
Yes, and it's time for New York to get on that bandwagon. And the last question was, does anyone know if plastic bags picked up at supermarkets, or I guess brought back to supermarkets, are actually being recycled? Neil.
Yes, I should say, in my area, Washington, D.C., they are. The supermarkets, Safeway, Giant, etc., Whole Foods, they have a business relationship with Tyvex. I think it's the construction insulation that it's processed into that material.
Oh, interesting.
I don't know about the values per ton, but I do know that it is being recycled into that construction material.
Great.
I can attest to that. Do you hear me?
Yes.
So I did a little research of our own recycling center that collects plastic bags, and also the ones in Marquisco, Bedford Hills. And I actually bought products from that company that picked them up because I found out who it was, and they're making outdoor furniture.
Yep.
Great. So I think I know this is a subject that people can talk about for hours and hours, but I will turn it back to Caitlin, and thank you for all your questions and comments. The chat is very worthwhile, and I think we should probably send that out as well.
Thank you so much, everyone. I'm going to share my screen one last time. And oh, wait, I see Mary Lou waving her hand. She would like a parting word. Go ahead, Mary Lou.
Thank you very much. Yes, a parting word. When I met Dan Knapp, I was working for the state of California. So I was a bureaucrat and I was assigned to be his project manager. He was going to write our agency a think piece about recycling. And I asked him, what are you doing in this field? The recycling field is full of engineers and you're a sociologist. What are you doing? And he said, well, the engineers agree that we have enough equipment and what we need to do is change people's behavior. And that's what sociologists do. So he thought he was perfectly situated. And I have to say, all these years, I have regarded Urban Ore as a sociology experiment that worked. because we're changing people's behavior. And the engineers really don't understand how to do that. So it's urgent, I think, for a social orientation to be brought into any infrastructure design, so that people who understand people's behavior and how to change people's behavior are brought into the design process with incentives. Thank you.
Caitlin, I will add one last word, saying that as new questions come up, as citizens discuss these issues, we're always available by phone or email to get feedback to you on questions that come up after this meeting.
Thank you so much, Neil. And we will also follow up with an email with resources, but I'm just posting here again. Where do we go from here? Next steps to move Westchester County towards zero waste. Please consider signing on to request that Westchester County hires a zero waste consultant. That is so important. Sign on to the Westchester Food Scraps Composting Pledge. Advocate for your municipality to adopt a zero waste resolution. And yeah, just keep thinking about this. Please keep thinking about this. And as Courtney brought up in the chat, you know, this waste is, these discards are being incinerated in Peekskill. And it's not fair. It's not fair. So thank you so much for coming. I hope maybe Mike dropped those links in the chat again. And yeah, thank you very, very much for your attention, your engagement, for caring. Please keep caring. And it's a delight seeing all these faces and people that are engaged and caring. Deep, deep thanks to our panelists who have taken so much time, who have shared their expertise. And we can do this, Westchester County. Goodbye and good night. Is that what we say?
Well,